across deserts, under oceans, and hidden beneath forest canopies. Traces of forgotten worlds sleep beneath our feet, stone roads swallowed by roots. Drowned temples buried in silt, silent ruins older than our oldest empires. Above us, the night sky stretches endlessly, a sea of stars billions of years older than our sun, each one a possible cradle for minds that may have risen and vanished before we ever lit our first fire. We like to believe our story is new, but what if it is only the latest verse in an ancient, unfinished song? What if civilizations have come and gone across the universe, leaving behind only broken cities, silent machines, or light to faint for us to catch? Tonight we follow the faint evidence, ruins, myths, cosmic time itself, and ask the question no one can yet answer. Are we truly first, or simply survivors wandering through someone else's forgotten dawn? The story begins. Not with us, but with a world that moved long before anyone named it. Imagine the ground under your feet as it once was. Plates of stone sliding like slow ships across a molten sea. Continents drifting for hundreds of millions of years, colliding, breaking apart, and drifting again. Where you stand now might once have been the floor of an ocean, later a mountain range, then a quiet plain under an endless sky. If you could roll time backward like film, seas would rush away to reveal dry valleys. Mountain chains would crumble and rise again. And ice would sweep down, covering half the planet in silent white. It is a scale too long for the mind to hold. Yet the rocks and fossils beneath our shoes keep the record. In cliffs and canyon walls, thin lines of clay and ash mark ancient volcanic winters. Shells pressed into limestone whisper of seas that no longer exist. Iron bands show when the air first filled with oxygen 2.5 billion years ago. In this shifting, restless world, there came a moment that was almost invisible, but changed everything. Somewhere in East Africa, in places we now call Olduvai Gorge and Lake Turkana, small, upright beings shaped flakes of stone. The earliest known tools dated to about 6 million years ago were simple cores and sharp edges struck from river pebbles. They fit awkwardly in a human hand because the human hand itself was not yet what it would become. But they were enough to split meat, scrape hides, and strike sparks. Fire followed, though exactly when and where is still argued. Some traces near Wonderwork Cave in South Africa hint at hearths nearly 1 million years old. Imagine the dark there, long before names or nations, and the first small flames licking up dry grass, while shadows of our ancestors flickered against the rock. Light against night must have felt like magic, a fragile barrier against predators and cold. Yet for almost all of this immense time, there were no words, no lines scratched on bone, no songs that could outlast a throat. Whole peoples lived and died without leaving more than footprints hardened in mud or a scattering of bones. A child's handprint pressed into a cave wall in France or Argentina might be one of the few signals that a whole life once unfolded, hunting, sleeping, fearing, loving, and passing on quiet knowledge from one dusk to the next. That is the part that humbles anyone who tries to imagine deep time. So much has happened and vanished before any ledger, before any stone tablet, before even a carved mark that we would agree is writing. When we look back across these millions of years, we see only fragments. A chipped scraper here, a femur. There, a hearth gone cold long before rivers carved new courses. It is tempting to think of these first makers as a prelude, as if all of history waited for us to arrive, but the evidence tells a different story. They endured ages we could hardly survive. Climate swung wildly. Deserts became grassland, then desert again. Ice sheets stretched down over what would one day be Berlin and Chicago. Through it all, families moved, learned, forgot, and learned again. Some branches of the human tree, like the Neanderthals and the Denisovans, thrived for hundreds of thousands of years and then disappeared, leaving behind only stone, bone, and the quiet echo of their genes inside us. Modern DNA studies show their traces still present in our own blood, a whisper that we are not alone, even within ourselves. And when we finally see the first faint outlines of culture, ochre-stained shells in Blombo's cave around 75,000 years ago, tiny drilled beads carried far from their source. Careful burials with flowers and tools, it is like glimpsing firelight on the far horizon. These were lives already rich with meaning long before the word civilization existed. Yet from the vastness of time, we hold almost nothing of them. One flood, one volcanic blast, one slow rising of the sea, and everything built or carried can be lost. The land forgets quickly when no one is there to rebuild. So when we ask whether we are the first or only civilization, it is worth standing still for a moment in this deep past. Earth has turned for billions of years. Entire mountain ranges have been worn flat and oceans drained and refilled, while a thin record of clever hands and shared fires survives only in scraps. There may have been no cities then, no stone libraries or iron ships. But there were minds and families, laughter and grief, fire and shelter. They were not nothing. They were the first footsteps, faint but real, echoing in deep time, telling us that most of what lives leaves almost no trace, and that the silence between traces is larger than we can ever measure. If you walk across the dry hills of southeastern Turkey, where the wind moves softly through wild grasses and the air smells of sun-warmed stone, you may come upon a place that should not exist, at least not where the story of civilization says it belongs. It is called Göbekli Tepe, and it sits under a sky that has watched 10,000 winters pass. Long before there was pottery to hold grain or cities to trade goods, before wheels, before writing, people here shaped limestone into massive T-shaped pillars and set them upright in great circles. Some of these stones rise 16 feet and weigh more than 10 tons, yet they were raised by hands that had only stone tools and rope, without the help of metal or the simple machine of the wheel. On their broad faces, carved animals still stride: foxes, lions, boars, cranes, and twisting snakes. The oldest layers are about 11,000 years old. Older than Stonehenge, older even than the first known farming villages. For a long time, archaeologists believed humans had to settle, plant crops, and store food before they could gather in such numbers to build something this large. Göbekli Tepe seems to say the opposite, that, long before the first granaries, small bands of hunter-gatherers came together to create something sacred and enduring. It is hard to imagine the world at that time. Ice sheets still lingered in the far north. The last mammoths roamed islands in the Arctic. People hunted gazelle, gathered wild wheat, and followed the seasons with their families. And yet, somewhere between about 9,600 and 8,200 BCE, they built not just a single ring of stones, but many stacked over centuries, one on top of another like chapters in a forgotten book. When their work was done, or their purpose fulfilled, they buried the structures deliberately under tons of earth, as if protecting a secret from the future. We do not know their language or their gods. It's only that something powerful enough moved them to quarry, haul, and carve with extraordinary care. Travel west and south, and you find other mysteries rising from the dust. Jericho, in the Jordan Valley, often called the oldest city in the world, had walls by about 8,000 BCE, thick, protective, and astonishing for their time. Archaeologists uncovered a massive stone tower built there roughly 10,000 years ago, its interior stairway still intact. These were not scattered camps of nomads. They were organized communities defending themselves, storing food, and watching the horizon for strangers. To build such things requires not only muscle, but planning, agreement, shared stories about why to work together. Jericho shows that long before the pharaohs or the kings of Sumer, humans were already finding ways to live side by side in something like a city. Farther north, on the Konya plain of Turkey, another ancient puzzle waits. Catalyuk, dating from about 7,500 BCE, is a dense honeycomb of mud brick homes, pressed so closely together that there were no streets at all. People moved from house to house across rooftops, climbing in and out through doors in the ceiling. Inside, they painted walls with hunting scenes and geometric patterns. They buried their dead beneath the floors where children played and families slept. Life was crowded and communal, yet filled with art and ritual. There were no palaces, no grand temples, at least none discovered, and yet a city thrived here for over 1,000 years. Each home was nearly identical, hinting at a society without rigid hierarchy, where cooperation and shared belief held the community together. What surprises those who study these places is how early and abruptly they seem to appear. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived in small, scattered groups, following herds and seasons. Then, in a blink of geological time, great projects rose: walls, towers, ritual centers, and villages so large they seemed like towns. Why? Perhaps climate played its part. The end of the Ice Age brought milder weather and more stable resources. Perhaps the gathering of people for shared worship or seasonal feasts created the first sparks of organized life. Some suggest that the act of building a sacred place like Göbekli Tepe drew humans into closer cooperation. And once that bond existed, farming and permanent homes followed rather than came first. It turns an old idea upside down. We may not have built temples because we had agriculture. We may have built agriculture because we had temples. And yet, even with these clues, there are vast silences. We know little of the language spoken by those first builders. Nothing of the songs sung as stones were dragged uphill, or the bargains struck around the hearth. We see the outcome pillars, standing under open sky, layers of plaster and paint. Floors worn smooth by bare feet, but not the inner lives of the people who left them. Their reasons are guesses. Their voices are gone. What we do know is that organized life, once thought to be a slow and cautious invention, might have come in leaps, sudden and powerful. When conditions were right and imagination stirred, as you picture those early cities, it is worth pausing to consider how fragile their record is. A few floods, centuries of erosion, and the work of thousands can vanish until only the luckiest archaeologist with a brush and trowel finds a hint. Whole chapters of our beginnings may be gone forever. Yet here and there, where the earth has been kind, stones still stand to remind us that we have not always been alone in wandering. There were cities before memory, people who gathered and built when the world was new. And though we do not know their names, their hands once shaped the path that leads to us, the ocean. Wide and without roads, has always been both a wall and an invitation. To stand on a shore and look out toward the horizon is to feel time stretching and folding. To imagine other people on other beaches long ago doing the same. We tend to think of deep-sea travel as something modern, something belonging to the age of discovery. Yet scattered through archives and old chests are clues that the sea may have been crossed far earlier than our school maps suggest. One of the most haunting of these clues rests in a single surviving piece of leather in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace, the Piri race map. Drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral and cartographer named Ahmed Muhyiddin Piri, it should have been just another world map of its era, but its coastlines hold puzzles. South America stretches in an unexpectedly accurate curve. Parts of the African coast align with modern measurements, and, most striking of all, a southern landmass appears, ice-free and detailed. Where Antarctica lies hidden under miles of frozen weight today, Piri, Race himself explained that he did not invent these shorelines. In notes scribbled on the parchment's margins, he wrote of compiling knowledge from 20 older charts, some captured from Spanish and Portuguese sailors, and others said to be ancient and unknown to his contemporaries. He spoke of using maps once owned by Christopher Columbus, themselves built on even older work. Scholars debate endlessly whether the supposed outline of Antarctica is real or just an error. But the question remains, how could anyone, without satellites or modern instruments, sketch with such confidence a coast buried long before human memory? Some argue that what we see is only the southernmost stretch of South America, distorted by medieval copying. Others point out that ice-free Antarctic shores last existed perhaps thousands of years ago, before the deep freeze returned. If true, it would imply a seafaring tradition stretching back beyond recorded history. The Piri race map is not alone. The Orens Fine map of 1531, Gerard Mercator's 1569 projection, and the enigmatic Xenomap claim to show lands in the far north, drawn from sources lost to time. The so-called Vinland map, though its authenticity is bitterly disputed, describes parts of North America long before Columbus's voyage. Even older are scraps of Chinese records telling of fleets sailing beyond the known seas under the Ming admiral Zheng He in the early 15th century. and there are whispers in Roman and Carthaginian lore of journeys beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we call Gibraltar, into the Atlantic centuries before. Vikings and Spaniards braved it. Yet we do know that humans were skilled at water long before great empires rose. Polynesian navigators crossed the vast Pacific using stars, waves, and bird flight, setting out in double-hulled canoes from as early as 1000 BCE and reaching islands thousands of miles apart with uncanny accuracy. In the Mediterranean, traders ferried obsidian and copper between islands before 3000 BCE. The Egyptians built seagoing ships to reach Punt. Perhaps in modern Eritrea or Somalia, around 1500 BCE on the other side of the world, people in Southeast Asia and Indonesia launched outrigger canoes into open water, their roots etched only in memory and oral song. Yet capable of crossing hundreds of miles between specks of land, early navigation did not rely on compasses or chronometers. It was a living science, the feel of swell against the hull, smell of birds and fish, the color of deep versus shallow water. In the Marshall Islands, stick charts made of palm ribs traced the wave patterns that radiate from atolls. In the Indian Ocean, sailors timed their departures by the monsoon winds that reverse each half-year. Such skills leave little archaeological trace. A master navigator might have carried his entire map in his head, passing it to his apprentice by long nights of recited waypoints and practiced landfalls. This oral cartography could vanish with a death or disaster, leaving later generations unaware of how far their ancestors once sailed. When Europeans began their global push in the 15th and 16th centuries, they were not stepping into a blank ocean. They were tapping into layers of older knowledge, Arabic star tables, Norse sagas, Portolan charts from Italian harbors, and perhaps fragments even deeper in time. That is what makes the Peary race map so haunting. It suggests there was a chain of handoffs stretching backward, copies of copies of copies, until the first makers themselves are lost in the mist. We know that libraries burned, the famed scrolls of Alexandria vanished, Mayan codices fed to flames, Chinese imperial archives purged. A single spark of knowledge about some distant coast might have passed through hundreds of years of hands before reaching Peary race's quill. It is easy to forget how easily the sea keeps its secrets. Ships rot, wood sinks, storms erase traces. Yet sometimes the ocean gives back a clue. A shard of pottery on an unexpected beach. A wreck holding foreign cargo, an ancient anchorage under sand. Step by step, these hints tell us that humans were curious and daring long before the phrase Age of Discovery was coined. The world's edges have been felt and tested over and over, though the stories of those first attempts are mostly gone. So when you look at a modern globe, bright with satellite certainty, remember that once there were other globes, crude, partial, but drawn by hands we will never know. Those hands belonged to people who had only stars and courage and the restless need to see what lay beyond the line where sky touches sea. Perhaps they reached places we think were untouched. Perhaps they glimpsed icy coasts now hidden. And perhaps they passed on that knowing in quiet ways that lasted just long enough for a Turkish admiral to copy into his leather map 500 years ago. The sea is still wide, still secret, and we are still learning how far and how early humans found their way across it. On a quiet day in the spring of 1901, sponge divers working off the Greek island of Antikythera surfaced with more than just sea sponges clutched in their hands. They had stumbled upon the remains of an ancient shipwreck scattered across the seabed marble statues, amphorae, coins, and something stranger still, a corroded lump of bronze and wood, so unremarkable at first glance that no one guessed its significance. It would take decades before careful cleaning revealed tiny interlocking gears hidden inside, each tooth cut with precision so fine it rivaled modern watchmaking. Today we call it the Antikythera mechanism, and we know it once predicted the movements of the sun, moon, and even eclipses with astonishing accuracy. Dated to around 100 BCE, it should not exist. At least not according to the way we were taught technology evolved. Nothing else like it appears in the historical record for another 1,000 years, till medieval Europe begins building astronomical clocks. Its presence in a Greek shipwreck forces us to imagine skilled minds 2,000 years ago, not only charting the heavens but reducing them to a machine small enough to hold in your hands? Turn the mechanism in your thoughts, more than 30 bronze wheels, some hidden, some stacked in layers, turning in perfect proportion to represent the celestial cycles. Greek letters labeled dials and pointers. A tiny inscription even warns of the color of the moon during eclipses. The idea that someone, somewhere, possessed enough mathematical knowledge and enough metalworking skill to create such an instrument unsettled the old narrative of progress. We have long liked to picture history as a steady upward climb, stone, then bronze, then iron, then science and machines, yet here is a gearwork computer at the dawn of the Roman Empire. Then nothing like it again for more than a millennium. Did the knowledge vanish when its makers died? Was it a guarded secret, lost with the ship that carried it? Or was it one fragment of a broader tradition erased by war and time? The Antikythera mechanism is not alone in challenging easy timelines. In the dusty shelves of the Iraq Museum sat small clay jars with copper cylinders inside and iron rods through their center. Discovered near Baghdad in the 1930s and dating back perhaps 2,000 years, these so-called Baghdad batteries look uncannily like galvanic cells. When filled with an acidic liquid such as vinegar or lemon juice, they can produce a small electrical current. Whether they were truly used for electroplating metals or simply for curiosity is still debated. But their construction shows that ancient craftsmen could experiment with forces we assume were discovered much later. The idea that an artisan in Parthian Mesopotamia might have toyed with electricity while Rome was still rising bends our neat story of invention. Roman builders. 2. Left behind a secret that our own engineers struggled to match until recently. Their concrete, a mixture of lime, volcanic ash, and seawater, has survived 2,000 years of storms and tides, still binding harbors and aqueducts long after modern Portland cement would have cracked and failed. Chemical studies show how the Romans deliberately encouraged their concrete to heal itself. When cracks formed, seawater reacted with minerals inside, creating new stone and strengthening the structure. The knowledge faded as the empire fell. Rediscovered only in the last century as scientists tried to understand why ancient piers remain solid while our own crumble. There are other scattered marvels, delicate glassware so thin it seems modern, surgical instruments from Pompeii, not far from what a surgeon might use today, and a Greek steam engine described by Hero of Alexandria in the 1st century, a hollow sphere spinning from jets of steam, essentially a primitive turbine. It was treated as a novelty rather than a power source. But it shows that the idea of using steam for motion flickered long before. James Watt, these discoveries troubled the comforting idea that human progress is slow, orderly, and unbroken. Instead, they hint at something more fragile, bursts of insight and craft that can flare brightly and then vanish when cultures shift. Cities fall, or the next generation cannot preserve what the last has built. The shipwreck at Antikythera may have been carrying a treasure of knowledge across the Aegean when a storm ended it. The Baghdad batteries might have been forgotten, curiosities left in a workshop swept away by conquest. The Roman recipe for enduring stone could have vanished with the guilds who guarded it when trade collapsed in the West. It is sobering to think how easily understanding can be lost. Libraries burn, the great one at Alexandria perhaps more than once. Scrolls turn to ash, tablets sink into mud, voices die. We like to think our age is immune because of digital archives and global communication, but time is long, and civilizations have thought themselves secure before. To find gears in a wreck, batteries in forgotten rooms, and concrete stronger than our own in ruins reminds us that progress is not inevitable. It happens when knowledge is tended like a fragile flame, yet there is also wonder in it. These artifacts are messages across ages, proof that human curiosity has always reached beyond the immediate need for survival. Someone in ancient Greece wanted to predict an eclipse. Someone in Mesopotamia wanted to coax strange power from metal and liquid. Someone in Rome wanted stone that could last beyond their grandchildren's lives. They may be gone, but their hands left traces that can still speak. When we hold the Antikythera mechanism under modern light, or test the Baghdad battery with a spark. We are in quiet conversation with minds separated by thousands of years. Minds that remind us we are not alone in wanting to know, build, and endure. Imagine standing on a broad plain that no longer exists, a stretch of grass and low forest where now there is only the cold, deep Atlantic. 13,000 years ago, the world was shifting out of the grip of the last great ice age. Vast ice. Sheets, some more than 2 miles thick, covered what is now Canada, the northern United States, and much of northern Europe. The climate had been warming gradually for thousands of years. Rivers swollen with meltwater cut new paths toward the seas. But the warmth was fragile, and the edges of that icy world were unstable. Then something happened, something sudden. Enough that scientists still debate its cause and meaning, but sharp enough to leave a mark across continents. The event is called the Younger Dryas, named after a hardy Arctic flower found in ancient pollen layers. Around 10,800 BCE, just as the planet seemed ready to settle into a new, milder age, temperatures plummeted again. In Greenland's ice cores, the record shows a drop of more than 10 degrees Celsius in only a few decades, a breathtaking swing by the scale of climate. For more than 1,000 years, the world plunged back toward glacial cold before warming returned. One idea that tries to explain this shock speaks of fire from the sky. The Younger Dryas impact theory suggests that fragments of a disintegrating comet struck or exploded over North America, triggering massive wildfires, flooding, and a sudden injection of dust and soot into the atmosphere. Layers of black sediment found at sites from Pennsylvania to Syria contain tiny carbon spherules, anodiamins, and high-temperature minerals, possible signs of an extraterrestrial strike. If true, the picture is almost unimaginable. A bright day turned to choking night. Skies veiled with smoke, herds and hunters alike, fleeing as flames ran across the land. Even without a direct impact, the melting ice was itself a hidden danger. As Great Lakes formed along the retreating glaciers, Lake Agassiz among them. An inland sea larger than all the Great Lakes combined, their icy dams eventually broke. Sudden outbursts of fresh water roared into the North Atlantic, disrupting the ocean's circulation. The Gulf Stream may have faltered. Warmth ceased to flow north. Europe and North America froze anew, while the details remained fiercely debated. What is clear is the violence of change and how little it takes to erase stability. Sea levels during this long transition rose not by inches, but by more than 120 meters, swallowing coastlines across the globe. Places where humans had lived for millennia, river deltas, broad coastal plains vanished beneath the advancing waves. In Southeast Asia, the land bridge known as Sundaland, once connecting what are now the islands of Indonesia and Malaysia, drowned, leaving scattered islands where a single mass of forest and plain had been, Doggerland, the rich hunting ground. That connected Britain to continental Europe sank under the North Sea. Along India's west coast, cities now lost beneath the Gulf of Kamhat may have been drowned. Oral traditions around the world remember these floods in strikingly similar ways. Gods angry with mankind. Waters swallowing mountains, boats carrying the last survivors. Archaeologists often work at the ragged edges of these disappearances. They find tools and hearths far inland, but they suspect that the most advanced communities of that time built their lives near coasts, rivers and estuaries, places now far under the sea. If human groups were experimenting with early farming, building permanent villages, or shaping stone temples, the ocean may have quietly claimed their work. What survives is only what chance allowed. A cave hearth here, a carved pillar inland, a mound where the sea could not reach. It is no wonder, then, that civilization seems to appear suddenly in the record. So much may have been washed away. Consider what happened to the Clovis culture of North America. For years, Clovis points, their finely fluted stone spearheads, were seen as the signature of the continent's first people. They thrived hunting mammoth and giant bison. Then, just as the Younger Dryas began, those animals vanished in a wave of extinctions. The Clovis toolkit disappeared soon after. Did the sudden cold and drought kill their prey? Did the shock of fires and meltwater destroy their hunting grounds? Cultures can be lost not because they were weak, but because the world can change faster than knowledge can adapt. It is tempting to think we would be better prepared, that our technology makes us safe. But the geological record tells a humbler story. It's a shift in climate, a sea that rises more quickly than anyone expects, a comet we fail to notice. These can rewrite human history overnight. Once, entire coastlines of homes and meeting places drowned, their names unrecorded. Once, rich valleys turned to frozen deserts and forced families to move or die. The survivors walked on, carrying skills and stories, but often unable to rebuild the complexity they had left behind. From their eyes, the world itself would have seemed to have ended. And in some sense it had. That is why catastrophe deserves a place in any honest story about human origins. The narrative is not a gentle climb, but a trail repeatedly swept away, with whole chapters ripped out by water, ice, and fire. When we marvel at the sudden flowering of places like Göbekli Tepe or Jericho, it may be because they were built by descendants of survivors starting over after a near-total reset. We see only the aftermath, not the vanished lives that once thrived closer to the sea. To remember this is not despair. It is respect for how precarious life's achievements can be. Our present cities, too, rest on shifting ground. The ocean still rises, the sky still holds stones, and the planet still moves to rhythms longer than any empire. Long before us, one disaster was enough to erase a world, and it could happen again. Across the endless Pacific, where waves roll for days with no sight of land and the horizon is a perfect circle, there lies a place that seems pulled from legend. Near the eastern shore of Pohnpei in Micronesia rises Nonmatl, a city built on water. Its silent canals now choked with mangroves, and its towering walls of dark basalt worn by salt and wind. The builders cut and stacked thousands of prismatic stones, each weighing many tons, to create artificial islets and causeways over the shallow reef. Some blocks reach 25 feet in length and stand so neatly fitted that modern engineers still wonder how islanders without metal tools or wheels could have moved and balanced them. Archaeologists date much of Nonmatl to around the 12th century, but oral stories on Pohnpei whisper that it is far older. Tied to rulers called the Sodeler, who rose from nothing and then vanished into myth. To walk there today is to hear water slap softly at the edges of massive stone platforms, to feel the weight of a city built for ceremonies and power, but left to the tide. The sea both hid it and kept it alive. The same waters that isolated Nonmatl also protected it from full destruction. Yet, Nonmatl is not alone in this twilight between sea and memory. On the western coast of India, where the city of Dwarka stands now, bright and busy with fishermen and pilgrims, divers discovered something astonishing in the late 20th century. Beneath the waves of the Gulf of Kamhat, 6 miles from shore and 40 feet deep, sonar and cameras revealed lines of stone walls, steps, and possible streets stretching across the seabed. Some pieces have been dated tentatively to 9,000 years ago, long before the supposed dawn of Indian urban life. Ancient Hindu texts, especially the Mahabharata, speak of a fabled city of Dwarka, built by Lord Krishna. It's brilliant and prosperous, only to be swallowed by the ocean after his death. For generations, these were seen as stories. But when archaeologists like S.R. Rowe began exploring the submerged ruins, legend and evidence began to blur. Pottery shards, stone anchors, and carved blocks rest, where fishermen cast their nets, hinting that the old tales may preserve a memory of cities lost to the sea when glacial melt drowned. India's coastal plains dot far across the planet, off Cuba's western tip near the Guanacaibes Peninsula. Deep-sea sonar scans in 2001 startled researchers searching for shipwrecks. At a depth of over 2,000 feet, they found what looked like massive geometric structures, blocks, and terraces arranged with unsettling regularity. The team, led by Paulina Zalitsky and Paul Weinsweig, suggested these might be the remains of an ancient settlement now buried under water and sediment. While mainstream archaeology remains cautious, the discovery revived stories about early Caribbean peoples and even whispers of older, unknown cultures before known American civilizations. Because the site lies so deep, any ruins would have to predate the last ice age when sea levels were far lower, or else the seafloor itself shifted catastrophically. Investigations remain incomplete, but the images of underwater shapes, resembling roads and plazas, linger in the imagination, a reminder of how much we do not know beneath the waves. Everywhere the pattern repeats. People build where life is rich, near river mouths and coasts, only to have the same waters rise and erase their work. Ancient Alexandria had entire quarters lost under the Mediterranean after earthquakes and slow subsidence. Heracleion and Canopus, once thriving Egyptian ports, slept under sand and silt, until rediscovered in the early 2000s with statues of pharaohs. Still upright on the seabed, off Japan's Yonaguni Island, massive stone terraces plunge into the deep. Their origins disputed, but compelling enough to draw divers and scientists, who argue whether they are natural formations or shaped long ago by human hands. Each find reminds us that our maps are shallow and our timelines partial. The sea acts like a vault but also a destroyer. Salt water eats wood and cloth. Waves scatter bricks and bones. Storms rearrange and bury. Yet it also seals away what it drowns, protecting against fire and looters. This paradox is why discoveries seem sudden. A sonar scan, a new dive, and suddenly, an entire forgotten world emerges from darkness. Technology now lets us read the ocean floor with increasing clarity. Sonar sweeps LiDAR from the air, and robotic submersibles reveal grids and walls where we assumed only sand. We are, in many ways, mapping ghosts. It is easy to romanticize these places, to picture lost empires and advanced seafarers, but the truth may be both more ordinary and more moving. Most were fishing towns, trade harbors, ceremonial centers, places where families lived, prayed, and launched boats. They built where the water fed them, and the water took everything back. A few hundred feet of sea rise is enough to erase centuries of effort. Remember that during the last ice age, shorelines were dozens of miles farther out. Everything humans built then would now be deep underwater. That reality alone could explain why civilization's origins seem to leap forward with no slow build-up. Our earliest experiments may simply be gone, their stones sifted by currents far from any diver's light. When we look at Nan Madol's Black Canals, Dorca's Ghost Streets, or the shadowed shapes off Cuba, we are glimpsing pieces of a much larger story, one where the ocean keeps more than it gives. Our own cities, with harbors and towers, stand not far above a restless tide. Just as those before us watched waves creep closer, we live on coasts that may one day slip beneath water again. The sea is patient, and memory is fragile. Yet in that fragility, there is also endurance. Stones waiting under silt for thousands of years until someone returns to find them. It is humbling to know that entire chapters of humanity can sleep unnoticed, and thrilling to think that at any moment we might uncover another. Proof that we have been reaching for permanence even as the water rises. Long before satellites traced the curves of storms or astronomers scanned for hidden rocks among the planets, humans watched the sky with naked eyes and restless hearts. To those who lived under its great unbroken dome, the heavens were not cold emptiness, but a living place that could bless or destroy. Again and again, across continents and centuries, we find stories of a time when the sky fell, when fire or water or both came down and swept life away. These stories appear in places too far apart to have borrowed from one another easily, yet they echo with unsettling familiarity, like a single great fear told in many tongues. In the floodplain of the Tigris and Euphrates, clay tablets written more than 4,000 years ago preserve the epic of Gilgamesh and the tale of Utnapishtim, a man warned by the gods of an oncoming deluge so vast it would wipe out humankind. He builds a vessel, gathers animals, survives a storm that lasts 6 days and nights before grounding on a mountain as waters retreat. Millennia later, Hebrew scribes would record a similar vision in the story of Noah, though with its own covenant and rainbow. Along the coasts of India and the islands of Southeast Asia, fishermen and priests told of oceans swallowing whole kingdoms. Kings humbled as waves took their palaces. In Mesoamerica, the Popol Vuh speaks of floods and darkness sent by the gods to clear away flawed creations of humans before trying again. Far north, Norse sagas describe Ragnarok, When the heavens split, stars vanish, and the sea rises to drown the world, leaving only a few survivors to rebuild on the green land that follows. For generations, these were seen as moral stories, metaphors for human folly or divine wrath. Yet as science has learned to read the physical world's record, some of those nightmares now seem like blurred but truthful memories. At the end of the Cretaceous, 66 million years before any human eyes, a rock about 6 miles wide struck what is now the Yucatan Peninsula, leaving the Chicxulub crater more than 90 miles across. The blow sent firestorms across continents, darkened the sky with ash, and ended the age of dinosaurs. That disaster lies far before our kind existed, but the Earth has suffered smaller, more recent strikes within human memory. In 1908, over the remote Siberian taiga, something exploded in the sky above Tunguska with the force of thousands of atomic bombs, flattening 80 million trees across 800 square miles. No crater remains. The object is thought to have disintegrated before reaching the ground. But the blast left a scar visible even today, and stories among the Awenki people of a fiery god crashing to Earth. When archaeologists study ancient layers, they find glassy tektites, shocked quartz, and thin lines of rare elements like iridium. All clues that something once rained from space. The younger, driest black mat, that strange layer of soot and tiny diamonds found across North America and the Middle East, could be from massive wildfires started when fragments of a comet broke up in the sky. Imagine the terror of that moment if you were living then. A cold light growing brighter, then fire sweeping the horizon, rivers boiling with debris, nights filled with falling sparks. No wonder survivors would tell their children of gods angered and waters rising. Words might fail to describe cosmic impact, but the fear would not, even when the cause was earthly, a volcano, a tsunami. The sky was the canvas where disaster announced itself. Ash from Thera, around 1600 BCE, turned the Aegean dark and may echo in Greek stories of Atlantis and Egyptian plagues. The eruption of Tambra in 1815 dimmed the sun worldwide, bringing the year without a summer to Europe and North America. People believed the heavens themselves had changed. Harvests failed, cold killed crops, and art from the time shows blood-red sunsets that lasted for years. If such dread could be carried forward in paintings and poems, how much longer might it survive when told from parent to child in the only way available? As a warning disguised as myth, it is striking how often these tales speak of survival and rebuilding. After the deluge, Utnapishtim offers sacrifice and is granted eternal life. Noah plants vineyards and begins anew. The Maya describe a remade world where humans try again after earlier flawed versions are swept away. The Norse imagine Leif and Lifthrasir, two humans sheltered in a wood, who emerged to see a reborn Earth after Ragnarok. These are not just entertainments. They are lessons in resilience whispered across time, instructions from people who endured a night when the sky seemed to end. Modern astronomy lets us know how real these risks remain. Space agencies track near-Earth objects. Geologists read past craters. Physicists model how dust veils could collapse crops and darken skies after a strike. Yet the old stories still matter because they hold a kind of psychological truth that instruments alone cannot teach. They remind us that our ancestors were not naive. They were witnesses. Something happened often enough and terribly enough that cultures from Mesopotamia to the Arctic kept alive the memory of floods and falling fire. When we stand beneath the quiet stars now, it is easy to feel safe, to think the sky is stable and will stay that way. But above us drift rocks we have yet to see. And under our oceans pressure builds for tsunamis to come, and in the deep earth magma stirs. The sky has fallen before, and the stories we inherit are faint messages urging humility. If we listen closely, the myths are less about punishment and more about remembering what it felt like. When the boundary between earth and heaven broke, they are the archive of terror and survival. Scratched not on stone, but on the human mind. Passed through countless tongues, so we would not forget, even when we no longer know. What exactly we are remembering, far south along the dry spine of Peru, where almost no rain falls and the wind drifts dust across a landscape so parched that footprints can last for centuries. There lies a mystery etched into the very skin of the earth. For nearly 50 miles across the Pampa Colorada and nearby desert plains, enormous drawings stretch across the surface. Hummingbirds with wings wider than a city block. Long, straight lines running arrow-like to the horizon. Spirals and trapezoids, and a sprawling monkey whose tail curls in an impossible loop. These are the Nazca lines, cut between about 500 BCE and 500 CE by scraping away the dark. Pebbled surface to reveal pale soil beneath. From the ground, they seem like random furrows or faint paths, but from above, a vantage point no ancient builder could easily claim, they become unmistakable figures. Crisp and deliberate. When Peruvian archaeologist Toribio Mejia Zespi first reported them in 1927, and when later pilots flying mail routes looked down and gasped at the great shapes, the question began, who made them and why? The answers shift with each generation of research. Some scholars, like Maria Reich, the German mathematician who devoted her life to mapping the lines, believed many served as a giant astronomical calendar, aligning with solstices and star risings that marked planting or harvest in a dry land dependent on every rare drop of water. Others think the lines may have been ceremonial walkways used in ritual processions to call down rain or honor mountain deities. Some designs connect to underground aquifers and ancient puqueos, spiral wells and canals still bringing water to nearby villages. Yet, despite decades of study, no single explanation settles the matter, and the scale itself forces a strange humility. People without wheels or metal, surveying instruments shaped a landscape visible from the sky. A map seemingly meant for something beyond ordinary human eyes. Thousands of miles away, in the sands of Egypt, another desert holds its own silent signals. The Sphinx sits on the Giza Plateau, its lion's body and human face worn by sand and time, staring east toward the rising sun. For centuries, Egyptians themselves forgot who had built it, calling it simply Father of Terror. Greek travelers recorded local legends. Later Islamic historians speculated it was older than the pharaohs. Modern archaeology ties it to Pharaoh Khafre around 2500 BCE. Yet even within mainstream study there are puzzles. The core body carved from bedrock shows deep vertical weathering some geologists argue could come from heavy rainfall, a climate more ancient than the Sahara's current dryness. The Great Pyramids nearby remain feats of planning and logistics that still inspire debate. How a society without iron tools moved and placed blocks weighing up to 80 tons, organized tens of thousands of workers, and achieved such perfect orientation to cardinal points and celestial events is remarkable. Though explainable with ingenuity, time, and careful administration, but the psychological effect endures. These stone forms seem to whisper of knowledge older than we can prove. Standing before such works, it is easy to feel the weight of time compress. The Nazca people vanish long before Spanish chroniclers arrive. The builders of the Sphinx left no blueprints. Yet their creations survive, often more durable than later cities. This durability invites speculation. Were they heirs to older traditions now lost? Instructions carried forward from cultures erased by flood or famine? Or are we underestimating what human hands and minds can do when focused on need and reverence? Each theory says something about us, as much as about them. We assume complex results require complex tools. Yet over and over, simple means guided by collective will and observation of the natural world have proven enough. The desert plays its part too. Where jungle devours stone and water rots wood, arid sand preserves, Nazca's dryness has kept those shallow trenches sharp for 2 millennia. The Sphinx endures because wind erodes more slowly than rain. The same protective emptiness that makes these places lonely also turns them into time capsules. They are messages written in landscapes that can wait. Modern technology adds a new layer to the story. Satellites and drones now trace hundreds of previously unknown Nazca figures, invisible to walkers, but clear from above. Infrared imaging peers beneath sand to find buried tombs and avenues near Giza. What was once unseeable slowly comes back into view, and with it the realization that there may be many more such messages hidden under desert crust, still waiting. Perhaps the deepest effect of these works is not their mystery, but the way they fold human time back on itself. They remind us that deep knowledge of stars, seasons, stone, and proportion is not new. People living in what we might call prehistory mastered surveying so well they could create kilometers-long straight lines across rolling terrain, align vast monuments to the exact rising of Orion's belt or Sirius, and leave behind structures that have outlasted empire after empire. They did it without what we think of as technology, because they had something we often forget to value: patience, observation, and generations willing to add their lives to a project that would not end in their own time. 2. Walk where the Nazca once walked, or to stand in the shadow of the Sphinx, is to feel a silent conversation begin. Not with gods, but with ancestors unknown. Saying we were here, we looked up, we measured, we believed something mattered enough to outlast us. That signal still travels through the dry air and across centuries, challenging the idea that human understanding began recently or moves only forward. The desert is quiet, but not empty. It holds evidence that minds long gone once reached across time just as we do now, hoping their work might speak when their voices were gone. Long before the rise of cities, before the first temples and the earliest canals, humans were already a diverse and branching species, moving across continents in ways that left footprints, bones, and most importantly, traces inside our own DNA. For centuries, we thought our ancestors were simple, a straight line from ape-like creatures to Homo sapiens, with Neanderthals as the closest relatives, brutish and ultimately defeated. But in the 21st century, science began to reveal a far stranger story. In 2010, researchers analyzing a tiny finger bone found in Denisova Cave, deep in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, discovered something unexpected. The DNA extracted from the fragment did not match Neanderthals or modern humans perfectly. It belonged to a previously unknown hominin, later named Denisovan. These people lived tens of thousands of years ago, perhaps contemporaneously with early modern humans, yet their bones are almost invisible in the fossil record. With only a handful of fragments discovered in that cave, still, through their DNA, they survive in living humans today. Their genes quietly mingled in populations across Southeast Asia, Oceania, and even Australia. Neanderthals, too, reveal a story far richer than early scholars imagined. Once thought simple and primitive, we now know they hunted large game with sophisticated tools, cared for the injured, and buried their dead. Their DNA survives in every non-African human, a legacy of encounters and mating between species tens of thousands of years ago. Roughly 2 to 3% of the genomes of Europeans and Asians come from Neanderthals, contributing traits from skin structure to immune system responses, shaping how modern humans adapted to environments outside Africa. In a sense, these long-extinct peoples are alive in us, walking invisibly through our blood and influencing how we respond to cold, pathogens, and even sunlight. It is a quiet inheritance, hidden from view, yet fundamental to our identity. The story does not end there. As sequencing techniques improved, researchers began noticing fragments of DNA in living populations that could not be traced to Neanderthals. Denisovans are known lineages. These signals, appearing in certain African and Southeast Asian groups, hint at entire ghost populations humans we have never named, never found in skeletal remains, yet whose genes persist through thousands of generations. Some may have diverged from Homo sapiens hundreds of thousands of years ago, lived, interbred, and disappeared without leaving tools or monuments for archaeologists to find. In other words, entire peoples, cultures, and histories could have vanished. Yet their presence continues silently in the humans around us today. The Denisovans themselves offer more puzzles than answers. Teeth and a jawbone found in Tibetan highlands suggest they could survive in extreme altitudes, far from the Siberian cave, implying physical adaptations that early modern humans lacked. The gene EPase1 inherited from Denisovans by modern Tibetans helps regulate oxygen in thin mountain air, and demonstrates how ancient interbreeding directly shaped human survival. Imagine living thousands of years ago, sharing valleys and hunting grounds with another species that was genetically distinct but not entirely separate, and how unknowingly you might carry their legacy into the future. Even the Neanderthal story is layers we are still peeling back. Recent research shows that some Neanderthal DNA is associated with behavioral traits and susceptibility to diseases. Variants that help them adapt to Ice Age Europe may now affect metabolism, depression, and even immune response in people alive today. In laboratories and genetic studies, their lives resonate through time, proving that extinction is never absolute, that even when bones crumble and campsites vanish, the echo of their existence persists inside the very molecules of modern humans. This science challenges more than just our understanding of human evolution. It reshapes the way we think about identity. Each of us is not simply the product of Homo sapiens alone, but a mosaic of interactions across species, counters long forgotten, and histories that have left no mark on stone or parchment. It suggests that our ancestry is far more tangled than the clean lines drawn in textbooks. That survival is not just about bodies or tools, but about genes carried quietly through generations, connecting us to people and places we may never see, walking through a museum or a cave today, looking at fossilized bones of Neanderthals, the Denisovan finger, or even fragments of early Homo sapiens. One begins to understand that death and disappearance do not erase life entirely. These people are not just ghosts in our imagination. They are living, measurable, and profoundly real inside us. In every breath, every pulse, every inherited immunity, we carry traces of others, some named, some lost, some still waiting for science to recognize them. It is humbling to realize that the story of humanity is not a single straight line, but a web of lives. Some vanished, some hidden, all stitched into the present. Long before the first words were carved in clay or ink, before cities rose from river valleys, humans learned to hold fire in their hands and in their minds. And that small discovery changed everything. In caves across Africa, from Wonderwork in South Africa to Gesher Banat, Yaakov in Israel, archaeologists have uncovered traces of hearths and charred bones dating back nearly 1,000,000 years. Evidence that early Homo erectus could ignite and control flames. Those first sparks were fragile, dependent on dry kindling, rocks struck just so, or lightning captured and tended, yet they brought warmth against cold nights, protection from predators and light and darkness, opening new hours for work, observation, and socialization. Imagine a small group huddled around a flickering hearth 50,000 years ago, faces glowing orange, children learning patterns of the fire, meat cooking slowly above smoke that rose into the cave's ceiling. In a sense dawning that humans could shape their environment in ways no other creature could. Fire was not merely warmth. It was the first technology to extend life beyond the immediate. The first tool that could be stored, tended, and carried, and in doing so it gave rise to thought itself. Chernobyl is not alone. Across the world, cities rise and then fall back into Earth's patient hands. In the Panama jungle, crumbling concrete locks of an unfinished canal from the French era lie hidden beneath vines. Detroit, once a symbol of modern industry, holds miles of abandoned houses where saplings, split sidewalks, and deer wander past assembly lines long silent. In Namibia, ghost mining towns stand with dunes pouring slowly through doorways, a tide of sand reclaiming kitchens and drawing rooms. These places are not ancient yet, but they are ruins nonetheless, reminders that our idea of permanence is thin. Within a few human generations, structures we call modern can become as strange and distant as temples no one remembers. Our footprint extends upward as well, in ways future eyes may find even more puzzling. Since the dawn of the space age, every rocket and satellite has left behind fragments circling above. Boosters. Defunct craft, flecks of paint traveling at bullet speed. There are more than 30,000 trackable pieces larger than a softball and perhaps 100 million smaller ones. Each tiny scrap an artifact of our brief reach into the heavens. Old Soviet satellites, American weather probes, Japanese rocket fairings, Chinese test debris. Together, they form a ghost belt around the planet, an unintended ring of relics. Some will stay aloft for centuries before drag or collision pulls them back to Earth, long after cities below are gone or changed beyond recognition. A thin halo of our ambition will still glint in sunlight. Silent fossils of our first attempt to step beyond the cradle. It is easy to imagine a far future archaeologist, perhaps not even human, piecing together what we leave behind. They might never know our languages or the stories that animated our lives. Instead, they would find bits, ceramic shards from our plates, titanium from spacecraft, glassy beads of melted concrete from nuclear tests, plastic polymers surviving like stubborn seeds. Skyscrapers will not last. Their steel will rust and concrete crumble in a few thousand years at most. But stainless cutlery, bronze statues, underground train tunnels, and dams might persist. So might chemical signatures in soil, leaded gasoline residues, plutonium isotopes, and the long tail of carbon we have pushed into the air and oceans. Our nuclear reactors and weapons, for all their danger, create traces hard to erase. Tiny particles of cesium and strontium embedded across the globe, time-stamped in the mid-20th century. These will tell any patient geologist that something unusual and technological once bloomed. Underwater. Future divers might drift through the frames of offshore oil rigs and drowned coastal cities, finding glass and plastic intact after millennia. The slow-rising seas we have triggered may flood whole urban coasts. New York's subways, London's Thames barrier, Shanghai's river towers, all could one day sleep beneath sediment and algae, just as Heraklion and Dorca did before. Somewhere above, Voyager and Pioneer probes will continue their long, cold arcs. Perhaps the most enduring trace of our species, carrying greetings and music long after the language that created them, is gone. It is sobering to realize how selective our legacy may be. We imagine that future minds will know us fully, but they may not. Our digital world, for all its power, is fragile. Servers need power and constant care. Code corrupts. Formats become unreadable in decades. What we call the internet could vanish almost overnight compared to stone and metal. A civilization digging through our layer might know we existed, but not how we felt or thought, much as we know the builders of Nanmadol or Göbekli Tepe only by silent stones. They might read our climate scars more clearly than our poems, and yet there is something deeply human in this pattern of making and losing. We build, knowing time will have the last word, but we build anyway. Perhaps that is why places like Chernobyl feel both tragic and strangely beautiful. Not because we want to fail, but because even failure becomes story. Forest and deer reclaiming boulevards remind us that the world endures beyond our planning, and our ruins may one day offer quiet refuge or lessons for whatever comes next. If a thinking being, centuries or eons from now, walks through the remains of our age, they might find echoes enough to understand. These were people who reached who dreamed beyond their grasp, who scarred their planet but also left signals of care and creativity. They might hold a piece of spaceborne aluminum, or a page sealed in ice, and wonder about the hands that made it. Perhaps they will know we were flawed but curious, that we reached upward and outward with hope. Even as our cities fell quiet behind us, to imagine this future is not surrender, but perspective. Our ruins remind us that nothing is permanent. Yet they also prove that traces last, sometimes enough for strangers to rebuild a picture. The best we can do is to leave behind more than wreckage, to build things worth being found, to pass on knowledge resilient 2 times long patience, and to step lightly enough that when vines grow over our work, the story they cover will be one we would not mind being told. Every age believes it understands. It's the map of the world until someone dares to test its edges. In the middle of the 20th century, long after ocean liners and airplanes had made seas seem tame, a Norwegian ethnography named Thor Heyerdahl built a raft of balsa logs and set out from the coast of Peru. It was 1947, and his craft, the canopies, looked fragile even in the harbor, a deck lashed with hemp, a small bamboo hut, and a single square sail painted with the face of an Incan god. Heyerdahl had spent years studying similarities between Polynesian myths and South American cultures, and wondered if early peoples could have crossed the Pacific long before European explorers. Most scholars dismissed the idea, insisting such voyages were impossible without metal tools or modern navigation. Yet Heyerdahl refused to let the ocean remain a barrier. For 101 days, he and his crew drifted and steered across nearly 4,300 miles of open water, living on fish, coconuts, and rainwater caught in canvas. When the canopies finally crashed onto a reef in the Tuamotu archipelago, it proved something fundamental. Ancient seafarers, using only what they could lash and carve, might have been far more capable than we imagined. He did not rewrite every chapter of Pacific settlement, but he tore open the assumption that the sea was impassable to early humans. Heyerdahl's voyage became a symbol for an entire kind of inquiry exploration, not to conquer or exploit, but to test deep human memory against the physical world. Decades later, in very different waters, another figure stirred controversy by chasing clues beneath the sea. Graham Hancock, a British journalist and writer, spent the 1990s and beyond diving into places where currents and geology, such as coastlines, once flourished. Among his most debated adventures is Yonaguni, off Japan's southern islands, where divers in the 1980s discovered massive stone terraces and steps descending into deep blue. Some say they are natural formations shaped by millennia of tectonic movement. Others, Hancock among them, argue they could be remnants of a sunken city far older than known Japanese culture. Massive rectangular blocks, sharp angles, and what appear to be carved platforms tempt the eye. Critics dismiss this as wishful seeing. But the site's strangeness has drawn scientists, geologists, and photographers into argument and wonder. If humans did shape Yonaguni, it would imply a complex society existed there before the end of the Ice Age. Later drowned by rising seas, such quests, whether fully embraced by academia or not, speak to a larger hunger. Modern explorers keep pushing into deserts, jungles, deep oceans, not simply to find treasure, but to recover missing pages of our story. In Guatemala and Honduras, teams now use airborne laser scanning LiDAR to peel away jungle canopy and reveal vast Maya, cities stretching far beyond what anyone imagined, with roads, terraces, and reservoirs once hidden under centuries of growth. In Egypt, radar and satellite imaging have uncovered lost tombs and forgotten streets buried under sand, sometimes rewriting dynastic maps drawn by archaeologists who thought they already knew the ground. In Turkey, Göbekli Tepe itself came to light only in the 1990s, after decades of being dismissed as a pile of rocks. Once excavated, it forced scholars to consider temple building thousands of years. Before agriculture was fully secure, the sea remains one of the greatest frontiers. Off India's west coast, divers and sonar operators continue to probe the Gulf of Kamhat, where outlines of stone streets and anchors appear in murky depths, raising questions about cities that might have stood 9,000 years ago when sea levels were far lower. In the Mediterranean, ruins of Heracleion and Canopus near Alexandria emerged from silt in the early 2000s, stunning historians with colossal statues and inscriptions preserved underwater. Even Antarctica, locked in ice, tempts explorers and scientists alike with hidden lakes and possible fossil beds under miles of frozen crust. Glimpses of a world before it froze 20 million years ago. Such expeditions are rarely easy or safe. Heyerdahl faced storms that threatened to snap his raft. Modern divers risk decompression sickness and tangled lines in dark, cold water. Desert archaeologists endure heat, sandstorms, and isolation for months. Yet what drives them is not danger, but the sense that human history is larger and stranger than we let ourselves believe. Textbooks often tell a neat progression, caves to farms to cities, but each new site, each improbable voyage shows a path far more tangled and daring. Our ancestors were restless. They crossed oceans with stars alone, carved monuments without steel, tracked seasons without clocks. Rediscovering their achievements is not nostalgia, but recalibration. Proof that we belong to a lineage of experimenters and dreamers. Sometimes these journeys bring only questions, sometimes answers, but either way they keep the map alive. They remind us that the world is not fully known and that time buries more than it reveals. They show that single determined lives, a man on a fragile raft, a diver among strange stone steps, a team flying lasers over rainforest, can shake old assumptions and invite new wonder. And they warn us gently that knowledge is not permanent. If we do not look, if we stop testing and exploring, our own record could fade as quickly as those we try to reclaim. When you think of the Kentucky bobbing across an endless Pacific or a lone diver's light cutting through Yonaguni's shadowed stairways, consider what ties them together: the refusal to accept simple stories, the insistence that humans have always reached farther than their supposed limits. These expeditions are not just about proving theories. They are about listening to the earth and sea, asking what has been lost, and whether we can bring some of it back into memory. They are acts of humility and defiance at once. Humility before time's depth, defiance against forgetting. Each successful crossing, each strange ruin rising from silt, is a whispered reply to silence, saying we still want to know where we came from and what we once were capable of being, in nearly every corner of the world. There are stories about bones too large to belong to any ordinary man. Tales whispered across generations long before modern science learned how to measure and name what the earth returns. Farmers plowing fields have claimed to uncover skulls the size of buckets, femurs longer than their arms. In the hills of Greece, shepherds once found massive bones and believed them to be the remains of ancient heroes or the monstrous race of Titans. In North America during the 19th century, newspapers told of giant skeletons found in river mounds. Though most of these reports vanished with no surviving evidence beyond sensational headlines. These legends cling because the idea of finding something far older and bigger than ourselves taps deep fears and desires, proof that the past held creatures grander or stranger, perhaps ancestors of mythic proportion. Yet alongside these stories runs the quiet, meticulous work of paleontology and archaeology, which turns rumor into something testable. Many giant bones uncovered in Europe were later identified as mammoth or mastodon remains. Ancient Greeks, lacking our understanding of extinct animals, would find a huge fossilized femur and imagine cyclopes and heroes, but in truth they were looking at Ice Age fauna. In the American mounds, careful later studies showed normal human skeletons, distorted by soil pressure or misreported sizes. The line between curiosity and exaggeration is thin, especially when wonder and fear sharpen the story. Still, real discoveries of ancient remains have repeatedly reshaped what we thought we knew about our own species and its journey. In 1856, quarry workers in the Neander Valley of Germany uncovered bones with a thick brow and unusual proportions. At first, they were dismissed as pathological or deformed modern humans. Only later did scholars recognize them as evidence of another branch of the human family. Those Neanderthal bones forced us to accept that we were not alone in our evolutionary past, and that humanity was not a straight path, but a tree with lost limbs. A century and a half later, in 2003, the tiny skeletons of Homo floresiensis emerged from a limestone cave on Flores Island in Indonesia, beings just over a meter tall, with brains far smaller than ours, yet sophisticated enough to hunt and use stone tools. Dubbed hobbits by the press, they lived as recently as 50,000 years ago, meaning small-bodied humans shared the earth with our own ancestors long after we thought we were alone. Similar surprises keep arriving. In 2015, a team working deep in South Africa's Rising Star cave system uncovered more than 15 partial skeletons of a previously unknown hominin species, Homo naledi. These beings had brains about a third the size of ours, but hands and feet suggesting climbing and tool use. More startling, their remains appear to have been deliberately placed in a remote chamber, an early form of funerary practice from creatures we assume too primitive for such behavior. Each find stretches the story of what it means to be human and when complex culture may have started, even within our own species. Bones have disrupted long-held narratives. Ancient DNA extracted from burial sites across Eurasia has shown that great migrations and mixtures occurred far more often than once believed. The famous Kennewick Man, discovered in Washington state in 1996, first sparked debate about the peopling of the Americas and connections to modern indigenous groups. Subsequent genetic work tied him closely to present-day Native Americans, affirming deep ancestral continuity despite colonial erasure. The Siberian remains of a young boy known as Malta, 24,000 years old, revealed genetic links between ancient Siberians and both Europeans and Native Americans, reshaping maps of Ice Age migrations. What these real discoveries teach, against the background noise of myth, is that the Earth's record is fragile and partial, but powerful when treated with patience. A single femur, jaw, or tooth can rewrite textbooks, but only when taken from rumor to careful measurement, from campfire story to laboratory. That fragility cuts both ways. Just as knowledge can grow from a handful of bones, it can also vanish if remains are lost to looting, miscatalogued, or destroyed by those who fear their implications. Wars, colonial collecting, and neglect have scattered countless finds into private hands or museum basements where their meaning sleeps unrecognized. The fascination with giants and lost peoples may never fade, because it springs from a true insight. Our past is not tidy. Whole human relatives disappeared before we came to dominance. Others lived alongside us, leaving faint genetic echoes. We feel this incompleteness and fill it with imagination. But the sober record, slowly assembled bone by bone, often turns out to be stranger and more beautiful than invention. Tiny hobbits building fires on Flores, archaic humans placing their dead in South African darkness, Denisovans leaving gifts of high-altitude genes. These are real wonders. Greater than any hoax or misread femur, there is also a quiet warning in how easily false stories can overshadow truth. 19th century giant skeleton hoaxes fueled myths that still circulate today, while genuine, paradigm-shifting finds like Neanderthal or Homo naledi remain poorly known outside science. Patience, evidence, and humility are slower than legend, but they build a firmer bridge to the past. When we speak of bones, carried home bones lifted from the ground and taken to museums, universities, or returned at last to descendants, we are also speaking of our attempt to reclaim memory from the noise of time. Each fossil, each ancient burial, each scrap of DNA is a voice once nearly lost. Some whispered that our family was larger than we believed, some that migration and meeting shaped us more than isolation. In the end, what we learn from these remains is not just anatomy, but kinship. We are the product of many lives. Many experiments of nature, some successful, some not. All part of a story still unfolding. To hold such a bone in one's hand is to feel deep time made physical, fragile, yet enduring.
Anonymous,
yet intimate. It is to know that we live among ghosts we can now name and understand. If only we keep looking carefully and resist the urge to let myth alone fill the dark, deep in the Amazon basin, where dense canopy once seemed unbroken and endless. New eyes have begun to pierce the green veil. For centuries, explorers returned from these rainforests with tales of long roads and grand plazas hidden by trees, only to be met with skepticism and the assumption that such things could not exist in soil so poor and climate so harsh. The very idea of complex cities thriving under constant rain and relentless vines seemed impossible. But in recent decades, a quiet revolution has unfolded in the form of light detection and ranging. LiDAR, a technology that sends pulses of laser light from aircraft and measures their return, peeling away the leafy roof to reveal the land below. What appeared to be untouched wilderness now shows ghostly grids and clearings, causeways and ditches. In Brazil and Bolivia, LiDAR surveys have mapped sprawling earthworks, long straight avenues radiating from central plazas, defensive ditches encircling ancient settlements, and raised fields where people once engineered water and crops. These shapes were invisible on foot, swallowed by centuries of regrowth, yet they show that dense, organized populations once shaped parts of the Amazon long before Europeans arrived and disease and conquest collapsed them. The impact of such images is profound. For generations, the prevailing story described Amazonian peoples as small, scattered, and transient. But the laser maps suggest urban networks on a scale once thought impossible in a rainforest, with ceremonial mounds, canals, and engineered soils known as terra preta, dark, fertile earth created by long human stewardship. Towns connected by straight roads ran across what now seems chaotic forest. The jungle's apparent wildness may in fact be a kind of forgotten garden, an echo of hands that shaped it and then were swept away by disease, invasion, and time. Similar revelations are transforming other continents. In Europe, where every hill and meadow seems known, LiDAR has revealed vast patterns beneath farmland and forest alike. In southern England, surveys over Salisbury Plain have uncovered networks of pits and post holes, extending miles beyond Stonehenge. Evidence of ritual landscapes far larger and more complex than assumed. In Germany and the Czech Republic, once invisible Celtic hillforts and field systems appear as faint geometries under crops, their outlines only clear when viewed from the air. Farmers have plowed above these secrets for centuries without knowing the old walls and roads. Slay just below Africa too is yielding its buried maps. In the savannas of southern Mozambique and Zimbabwe, LiDAR has traced ancient stone enclosures and settlement patterns linking to the builders of Great Zimbabwe and their predecessors, showing a web of towns and trade long underestimated. In West Africa, where later empires left oral records but few surviving monuments, surveys reveal causeways, ramparts, and market sites hidden beneath grass and brush. These finds challenge colonial-era assumptions that complex states were later rivals to the continent. Instead, they show long-standing city networks adapted to climate and shifting rivers, forgotten only because time and later conquest erased their surfaces. Technology is not just illuminating individual sites, but rewriting whole narratives. Until recently, much of archaeology depended on slow groundwork, trenches, shovels, guesses from surface finds. Now, in hours, a plane or drone can scan square miles and return a ghost map of past lives. What emerges is a global pattern. Humans have altered and organized landscapes far more widely and deeply than we once believed. Our species has been building, trading, and shaping Earth long before the earliest written records. And many of those efforts vanished not because they were small, but because nature is patient and memory fragile. There is something moving about these silent recoveries. A LiDAR scan looks almost like an X-ray of time, showing faint scars where roads ran, where plazas gathered dancers and traders, where ditches guarded fields. In the Amazon, one recent discovery revealed a settlement network with monumental platforms and broad avenues dating back 2,000 years, graced so thoroughly by later forests that a walker would never guess. In Cambodia, similar techniques mapped Angkor's hidden outskirts. Roads and ponds lost beneath rice and brush since the empire fell in the 15th century. Even here the jungle, like the Amazon, had covered but not destroyed. To watch these shapes appear on a researcher's computer screen is to feel the past breathe again. Where there was once only green or brown, suddenly human order emerges. Circles, lines, avenues, the unmistakable language of settlement and intention. And with each revelation comes humility. Our tidy timelines, our sense of who was capable of complexity, falter. We see that people whose names we do not know built and engineered on a scaled arrival, better remembered empires. It also deepens the sense of how easily whole worlds can vanish. All it takes is a pandemic, a drought, a shift in trade, an invading army, or just time and regrowth. And a network that took centuries to shape disappears from sight. What endures is not always what we expect. Stone lasts longer than wood, but earthworks last longer still. 1,000 years of trees can hide entire cities and leave. There's no clue until a laser pulse returns. Yet there is hope in this technology too. Each discovery is a restoration, a way of returning names and stories to peoples often dismissed as primitive or rootless. Each map helps modern descendants reconnect with a deep heritage and challenges us to respect landscapes as historical archives, not empty ground. And for all of us, the message is clear. Our own cities might one day be hidden, but not forever. Time covers, but time also reveals when tools and curiosity persist. Standing in a forest or field, it is humbling to imagine layers beneath your feet, plazas where voices once gathered, roads where carts rolled, fields tended by forgotten farmers. LiDAR and its successors, let us hear these echoes, faint but insistent, calling through soil and leaf litter that history is vaster and more intricate than we imagined. And perhaps, centuries from now, someone will scan our quiet suburbs and towers under whatever forest returns and see our faint geometry too. Just another chapter beneath their feet, far beneath the surface of the present. The earth is always at work, burying and transforming what we leave behind, grinding our proudest structures into quiet layers of rock. If one could stand far in the future and slice downward through time as if through a cake, there would come a thin and curious band where our age once lived a stratum. Bright with strange colors and stubborn materials, geologists already call the idea the Anthropocene, a new epoch marked not by mountain building or ancient seas, but by the unmistakable trace of humans. In that layer, there will be crushed fragments of our skyscrapers and bridges, concrete turned to chalky rubble and mixed with steel that has long since rusted, but left ghostly streaks of iron. There will be glass, melted and reshaped by heat before breaking again into sand-like shards. There will be ceramics and brick from cities fallen quiet, their outlines pressed into silt and clay just as ancient Roman ports sleep under Mediterranean mud. More startling will be the plastics. Unlike wood or cloth, they resist decay. Unlike stone, they flow and deform before settling into odd, permanent shapes. Every bottle, wrapper, toy, and fiber sheds tiny threads that drift into rivers. Seas and air then settle into sediments. Over time, they fuse with shells and sand into a new kind of rock, plastiglomerate, already forming on some. Hawaiian beaches where melted debris mixes with volcanic stone. A future digger might find bright blue and red seams running through dull gray layers and know, without seeing us, that there was once an age of artificial color and mass manufacture. They might puzzle over the chemical complexity of these polymers, so unlike anything natural, and guess at creatures clever enough to invent but not control their own inventions. Above that buried world, long after we are gone, some traces will still circle the planet. Thousands of satellites and broken spacecraft, left to drift when fuel ran out, will remain for centuries and perhaps millennia. Aluminum panels, gold foil, and titanium bolts will move in silent orbits until slow drag or collision draws them down to burn. But a few, like the Voyager probes, will escape into deep space, wandering long after the continents have shifted and oceans redrawn, for any eye that might one day find them. These machines will be our first fossils, tiny messengers built by a species that looked up and tried to speak across the void, on the ground. What endures is unpredictable. Steel skyscrapers, which seem eternal to us, may collapse into rust within a few thousand years, Once glass shatters and water seeps in, underground tunnels and transit lines could survive longer, protected from weather. Massive dams and concrete shells may persist in broken but recognizable form for tens of thousands of years, though their names and functions will be long forgotten. Our cities may look less like monuments and more like fractured reefs, with strange alloys and rebar fossilized among new sediments. Nuclear waste sites and deep mine shafts could remain as subtle but telling scars. Plutonium's long half-life would glow faintly to future instruments, a signature of power once tapped and feared. If someone human or otherwise were to dig into these layers 1,000,000 years from now, what story would they build? They might not know our faces or speech, but would know we shaped energy, mined deeply, traveled far. They would see a sudden, sharp change in the chemistry of the planet. Carbon dioxide levels leaping, nitrogen spiking from fertilizer, radioactive isotopes appearing abruptly around 1945. Plastic fibers woven through what was once seabed. They would see that life reorganized itself in response, coral reefs bleached, forests shifting, extinction pulses among animals and plants. Our arrival would be as clear to them as the meteor that ended the dinosaurs is to us. Time scale makes this perspective sobering. Civilizations we call ancient Sumer, Egypt, Maya, are only a few thousand years gone. Already we strain to recover their songs and intentions. Ours is unlikely to be different. Digital archives and paper will not survive deep centuries. Great libraries and data centers, if unpowered, decay quickly. Magnetic drives lose memory in decades. Plastics and concrete outlast books. The most ordinary things, a child's toy, a bottle cap, a city sewer, may speak more clearly than our grandest monuments. The message of deep time is humbling. What we most want remembered is rarely what endures. Yet there is a quiet wonder in imagining this future archaeology. Somewhere, a being might hold a shard of fused sand and polymer, a chunk of concrete mixed with rebar, and wonder about the hands that shaped it. They might map our vanished coasts and realize seas rose and cities drowned. They might find traces of our reach upward titanium struts from rockets, the blackened ghosts of satellites fallen to Earth, and know that we once tried to leave home. They may misread us, as we misread the builders of forgotten mounds and towers, but they will know at least that there was a species here, inventive and restless. Thinking this way does not diminish us. It gives our moment a sharper edge. It reminds us that we live on borrowed time and shifting ground. Our works must be chosen with care if we hope to leave anything worth discovering. The strata of tomorrow will form whether we want it or not. What fills it, poison or beauty, waste or wisdom, is still partly ours to decide. The earth will keep its patient record. One day, long after names are gone and maps redrawn, a quiet band in the rocks will hold the story of now. And though we may vanish, the planet will remember we were here far beyond the thin shell of our atmosphere. Time unfolds on a scale that makes even the oldest ruins on Earth seem like new footprints in damp sand. Stars are born in silent clouds of gas, burn for billions of years, and collapse into white dwarfs. Neutron stars, or black holes. Galaxies drift and collide like slow-moving tides. Our own sun, bright and familiar, is only halfway through its life. It has shone for 4.6 billion years and will shine for about as long again, before swelling into a red giant that scorches and then swallows the worlds around it. In that span, the rise and fall of every civilization, every language, every thought we have ever recorded is a flicker, gone before a single galactic year. The 225 million years it takes our solar system to complete one orbit of the Milky Way has passed. Yet against this oceanic time, life has proven remarkably persistent. On Earth alone it has started and restarted after cataclysmic endings that should have erased all hope. 4 billion years ago, single-celled organisms learned to harvest sunlight and turn it into chemical energy, exhaling oxygen that slowly built an atmosphere fit for creatures like us. 600 million years ago, strange soft-bodied beings swam and crawled in seas left empty by older die-offs. Then came the Cambrian explosion with trilobites and creatures of armor and claw. Dinosaurs ruled for more than 160 million years, until an asteroid impact 66 million years ago ended their reign, but opened space for small, nervous mammals to evolve into primates, and eventually us. Each time the planet nearly died through volcanic fury. Ice ages and cosmic strikes, life found a way back. Altered but alive, when we wonder if we are the first civilization. The pattern of survival and renewal offers both hope and humility. If on one small planet life can adapt and rise again after so many endings, how many other worlds might have hosted their own experiments, their own eras of brightness? Around other suns older than ours, there has been time enough for continents and oceans, perhaps for toolmakers and dreamers to appear and disappear. Some might have reached for the stars, some might have fallen silent long before their signals could cross to us. Others may have flourished for millions of years and then gone, leaving no trace visible to telescopes scanning from our new young species. The universe itself seems to hold a long memory in its elements. Every atom of carbon in our bodies was forged inside a star that lived and died long before the Earth existed. Iron in our blood, calcium in our bones, gold in a wedding ring, all scattered by supernova and drawn together by gravity's slow insistence. In that sense, we are living fossils of cosmic events, our very flesh a record of other ages and suns. The same processes that made us possible will continue long after we are gone, recycling matter into new worlds and maybe somewhere new minds. And still we search. We build instruments to catch the faintest radio whispers, the smallest dips in starlight that betray planets circling far away. We listen for something older and wiser, a confirmation that we are not alone. So far, the answer has been a deep, wide silence. Perhaps that quiet is simply the vastness of space and time, civilizations too far to reach us, too brief to overlap our own moment. Perhaps it is a warning about how easily intelligence can vanish. Or perhaps it is only that we have just begun to listen and our tools are still too simple, our patience too short compared to cosmic clocks. What is certain is that our chapter, no matter how proud or long it feels, is brief. The fossil record shows us that entire lineages thrive and end without warning.
Ow.
That extinctions can come from the sky, the ground, or our own hands. We know, too, that memory is fragile. Our books and digital archives are soft compared to stone. Our towers will erode. If there have been other civilizations anywhere, here before us, or far away, their monuments may have vanished into dust long before we looked. We could be walking atop the last traces of a forgotten world. Never know. Yet there is quiet power in understanding this impermanence. It reminds us to live and build with care, to keep curiosity alive, even knowing the scale of the unknown. The universe's long memory does not preserve every story, but it preserves enough, the elements that made us. The light we send out, the brief ripples of our actions. If we fail, something after us may still rise, using what we left behind in rock and orbit and chemistry. If we endure, we may one day become part of that long thread ourselves, a species that learned to last, to listen, and perhaps to meet others who have done the same, standing under stars. It is tempting to feel small, yet also strangely connected. Those same stars have burned over countless forgotten ages, and we are for a blink, aware enough to ask where we came from and whether we are alone. That question itself may be our finest creation, proof that the universe remembers through us, at least for now. We do not know if we are the first intelligence to wonder or only the latest breath before silence returns. But as long as we keep asking, we leave something more than ruins. We leave the signal of wonder, fragile but real. A thread reaching into the dark and forward into time far longer than our lives.